Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit down.
Hi, I'm Michael James, live from the Heartland show. Welcome back. That was Twin Peaks we just heard. And our next guest is John Hill. And he is going to join Euan talking a little bit about elections in Britain. He's going to talk a little bit about the Battle of Algiers and politics in North Africa. But before that, Euan's going to give us a little soccer update because there's a lot of sports fans out there waiting to hear what he has to say. Take it away, Euan.
I'm not sure that's the case, Mike. No, the other thing on the horizon, of course, as I've regularly talked about on the show, is the FIFA World Cup, which is now less than a month until it starts here in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. A couple of interesting things. There's still a lot of discussion of the Iran team, whether they'll get visas to come and play. I mean, that's still a little uncertain. But I think the news has been that ticket sales have been sluggish and that hotels are releasing unsold rooms, and there's also a lot of concerns about public transportation and getting to the games as well if you're a supporter. And I think one of the things that has happened is FIFA, the organizing body, basically made the argument that people in the United States are used to paying hundreds or thousands of dollars to attend premier sporting events. And so they instigated what was called dynamic ticket pricing so that the prices rose with demand. And what we're seeing now in some of the lesser marquee matchups, which surprisingly, a lot of them involve the team from the country of Austria in Europe. But a lot of the lesser marquee matchups are seeing their prices really bottom out. And so this dynamic pricing has led to a lot of fans deciding not to travel. And so as a result, that's hit kind of local businesses that were expecting a kind of boom of tourists visiting, hitting the hotel industry, hitting... There's been a lot of plans for public transportation, overtime for police and security, all these things. So everything's still a little bit in flux, and we're less than a month away.
Well, we'll see what happens with all that. Let's shift a little bit, although we're going to stay with European-style football or elsewhere from the U.S. We're going to Great Britain. Both of you guys are from Great Britain, different parts, of course, I think. How about, I was trying to figure out what goes on with their elections and the most recent election and whether the head of the Labour Party is going to be able to withstand the criticism, et cetera. Can you give us a little report? Because we have election stuff in our face all the time, and it's nice to know that other people have to deal with it too.
Right. I'll give you a quick overview of what went on, and then John can maybe do some analysis. So it was the local elections in the UK. So it's almost like the midterms, but it's not for the government. It's for the government of Scotland, the government of Wales, and then city and sort of municipality administrations throughout England. And what we saw was Keir Starmer, who's the prime minister, his ruling Labour Party was basically wiped off the board at the local level across the UK. And there was big gains for Nigel Farage's Reform Party in England. They're the Farage is allied kind of with President Trump. And then in both Wales and Scotland, majorities for the nationalist parties that historically have wanted to fragment the United Kingdom. So really is a fraught time, but it's not as if Prime Minister Starmer is kicked out of office. It's just there's less confidence in his ability to lead the Labour Party going forwards. And so, John, I don't know what your assessment of it was.
Yeah, exactly that. So the poor performance of the Labour Party in the local elections has led to internal challenges within the Labour Party being mounted against Keir Starmer, which may well lead to his being removed as party leader and therefore as Prime Minister. So the significance of these challenges is not to be underestimated. These elections are also important because there is a practical importance in that they give parties access to funds, certainly in Wales and in Scotland, but it also helps them develop their grassroots capabilities. They get councillors in these boroughs and in these cities, and it motivates their kind of grassroots supporters to go out and campaign for their parties. And for the first time ever in the UK's history, certainly in its modern history, we're seeing the emergence of the breakdown of the two-party system and the emergence of 5 UK-wide parties. And that possibly has interest and significance for the United States because, like the United States, the UK has a first-past-the-post system. So if this can happen in the UK, then potentially it could happen in the US as well.
Right. And if you have a 5-party system and the other parties at a kind of ascendant or holding their own of the Green Party, which is attacking Labour from the political left, Reform is attacking the traditional Conservatives from the political right, and then somewhere in the middle you have the longtime centrists of the Liberal Democratic Party. And so I think the other thing is you can see somebody winning with only 25% of the vote because the vote gets split across multiple different parties.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. So, and this is part of the process of our politics becoming more unstable. So parties can win power with a smaller share of the vote, which raises questions about the strength of their mandate. Also, culturally, and again, like the United States, our system is not designed for coalitions and for cooperation between rival parties. It is adversarial. And you really see that in the House of Commons. And no doubt your listeners and your viewers will be glued to parliamentary TV in the UK. And the more eagle-eyed of them will see that on the floor there are 2 red lines, and those red lines are 2.5 sword lengths apart to stop the members of the opposing parties from stabbing each other. So our politics is really set up to be adversarial, and we don't have the culture that exists in European countries where they have proportional representation for coalition building and for cooperation. And one of the practical problems that we've got of this adversarial nature is that our prime ministers are struggling to complete their terms in office. If Keir Starmer goes, we will be on our 6th or 7th prime minister in the space of 8 years. So at the moment, our prime ministers are lasting less than 2 years on average per person, which is positively Italian in its tempo.
Let me ask from, I tend to think in terms of left and right a lot, and I'm just wondering, I assume you guys are a little bit to the left, and does this election, does it strengthen the left in Wales and Scotland and diminish the left in England? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you can make that assessment. Both the Scottish National Party and the Welsh Nationalist, Plaid Cymru, would be in American terms the progressive left. They'd be to the left. The Green Party to the left as well. Whereas in England, the big winners were Reform, and that's Nigel Farage's party, which are definitely further to the political right. John, what would be your take?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. Plaid Cymru and the Scottish the SNP, they are, as you say, they have more progressive politics, more progressive instincts. But across Europe, the labels of left and right are becoming more problematic. So with Farage, as with the Rassemblement National in France, you will see elements of its economic program, for example, which would ostensibly seem to be more left-wing. So they are in favour of nationalising certain industries, particularly heavy industries. They are in favour of essentially guarding against some of the excesses of the globalisation of capital as well. But in other ways, often in social ways, they are very conservative. So the old kind of certainties and breakdown of left and right is that's being fractured as well in the UK and in other European countries.
Well, hey, let's switch. Let's get out of Great Britain and Europe, and let's go to North Africa. And I know that you want to talk a little bit about the movie, The Battle of Algiers, and why it's maybe important to Algeria today. I got to say, it was one of the most exciting movies I ever saw in my life. And it was about the independence struggle by Algeria and Algerian people against France, I believe. How about talking a little bit about that, Professor John Hill?
Well, thank you very much. And delighted to. And to anybody who's not watched the movie, I can highly recommend it. It was originally filmed in French, but you can get subtitled versions, you can get dub versions. It's a great, great film. And one of the things that makes it so remarkable is that it was filmed in 1965 by an Italian director called Giulio Pontecorvo. This was 3 years after Algeria had gained its independence, and notwithstanding certain changes to names, it is historically pretty accurate. It is a pretty faithful representation of what historians think actually happened during this part of Algeria's armed struggle for independence. One might expect, given that it was made so soon after independence, for a film that was more triumphalist, a little bit more propagandist, perhaps, but that's not the case. It's actually a pretty faithful depiction of what happened during this part of the War of Independence. The film itself focuses on a particular episode in the Algerian War of Independence, or Revolution as it's called. That war lasted for 8 years, from 1954 to 1962, and was ostensibly fought between France, who was the occupying colonial power, and the anti-colonial nationalist group called the National Liberation Front. And the National Liberation Front emerged from pretty much nowhere. It kind of launched its armed campaign and was able to sustain it for 8 years against if not a superpower, then a great power that was heavily invested in the country. France had originally invaded Algeria in 1830. So by the time the war started, it had been there for well over a century. There was a European population of about 1 million men, women, and children who could trace their roots in the country back multiple generations. So France was heavily invested in it. But despite the odds, the National Liberation Front was able to win independence for Algeria. And the Battle of Algiers was a particular episode during this war when the FLN, the National Liberation Front, sought to take the war more directly to European civilians. And the start of the war was essentially one of the earliest moments in the war was a series of bomb attacks against cafes and other places where European civilians, European settlers used to hang out. And in response to that, France sent in the paratroopers, sealed off the city centre, the old Arab city centre in Algiers called the Kasbah, and set about trying to dismantle the National Liberation Front. And it used all the means, the paratroopers used all the means at their disposal, including torture. And militarily, they were successful. They did dismantle the National Liberation Front in Algeria, and they came very close to destroying the group as a whole. But despite this short-term military success, it was a long-term military strategic failure, because the level of violence that the French paratroopers unleashed, their use of torture, their disappearance of thousands of Algerians couldn't be kept secret. And that really helped alienate parts of the Muslim population that previously had been agnostic about whether French rule continued or not. So it really helped destroy kind of any middle ground that existed between the two sides.
So why talk about this now? What is the situation in North Africa? How does it relate to global relations, we're 60 years on from those days, 60, 70 years on. So why is a film like that and a story like that still relevant to us?
Very, very good question. It's still relevant. It's the 60th anniversary, 61st anniversary of the film being made. So there is this sort of nice anniversary to consider. It's important. The film is important not only because of what it depicts, but also it has its own kind of history. The film, as Michael said, became very popular with anti-colonial forces in Africa, in the Middle East, and elsewhere around the world. And a link back to the United States is that in 1969, members of the Black Panthers relocated to Algeria to set up the international section of the Black Panther movement. They didn't stay in Algeria particularly long. They arrived, the first of them arrived in 1969, and by 1973, they pretty much all disappeared. But during that period, they kind of helped draw attention to Algeria as a center of anti-colonial agitation in Africa and around the world more broadly. Its ongoing importance to today can be seen in the fact that Algeria is at a crossroads in terms of how it is governed and who governs the country. The War of Independence was such an important moment for Algeria that pretty much until today, politicians, presidents, prime ministers have all had to try and trace their lineage back to the War of Independence. They've had to kind of demonstrate their early membership of the National Liberation Front, the roles that they played in the struggle against France, and so on and so forth. This is becoming increasingly hard to sustain because inevitably these guys, and they're all mostly men, they are all dying. And the vast majority of the Algerian population, like lots of African countries, is below the age of 30. So they were born well after the war was over. They're aware of the war, but it has far less importance and resonance with them than it did with their parents and with their grandparents. And so the country is really struggling in making the transition from the wartime generation to other generations, to younger generations, and how and kind of transferring power from one to the other.
I'm going to throw in this question because I always want to know what happened to Ben Bella, who was kind of a leader back then. And I think he was a kind of a leftist. And then I don't know what the government of Algeria has been. I don't think of it as a revolutionary government these days. I just wonder if you could shed some light on that and maybe talk about the decline of the colonial empires in that period. You had the French not only lose in Algeria, but in Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam. The U.S. then gets beat in Vietnam. It was a clear shift, Pan-Africanism, global revolution. And today we're kind of falling back into imperialist powers trying to manipulate countries and how they are governed.
Absolutely. So in answer to your first question, the National Liberation Front was unusual in that it wasn't founded or led by any one individual. It was founded by what are frequently referred to as the 9 historic chiefs. And Ben Bella was one of these early chieftains. He was arguably the most charismatic of them, and as a consequence, he also had military experience. One of the great paradoxes of history is that he'd won a military medal for his combat efforts during the Second World War, and he, many early nationalists actually had served in the French armed forces against Germany. And they fought for France to liberate Algeria, to liberate France from the Third Reich, and then they get back home and find that they had no liberation themselves. There's no independence themselves, and they become totally disenchanted with the existing system. So Ben Ben was very charismatic. He was initially the first president of Algeria, but was deposed in a coup d'etat in 1965 by the head of the army, a man called Houari Boumediene. And then, somewhat tragically, Ben Bella spent the following decades until, I think, the 1970s or 80s, sort of under house arrest, before he was subsequently released, by which time he was an older man without really a power base, and his political career was behind him. The war is also important because it continues to colour and to shape relations between France and Algeria today. Algeria, a little bit like, less so than Morocco, but like Tunisia, continues to seek an apology from France for what happened during the war, particularly for some of the abuses of human rights that took place during the war. And the French government continues to not release critical documents from that period. It continues to keep them under lock and key. And this is important because the relation between these two countries is important because of the size of the Algerian and the Algerian heritage population in France. Sorry, Michael.
Let me just throw in, we only have a few minutes left, but, a while back we had the Arab Spring, and it was, a lot of hope for a lot of countries that things were going to change. What's the legacy of that? Where is it at today? And how does Algeria maybe fit in with the total Arab Spring movement?
The Arab Spring, unfortunately, has ended in disappointment. The one country where you saw real democratic progress was in neighbouring Tunisia, where the president, whose name I have now forgotten, was removed from power, and there was an attempt to create a more democratic Ben Ali. He was removed from power, and a more democratic government was put in place. But since COVID, there has been backsliding in Tunisia, and the current president, Essebsi, has looked to try and roll back some of the democratic rights that were created there. In Algeria, there were a series of protests as well. Your listeners and viewers may remember the Hirak protests. These made kind of global news, and they were part of the same wave of protests that kind of swept the region. But we've not seen the same level of political change that we did see in Tunisia. Euan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as we wrap up, why should people in the United States keep an eye on North Africa? What is happening there that would, given the current geopolitical situation in the Middle East and so forth, why should we keep an eye on North Africa?
North Africa is important to the West for several reasons. One of them is energy. Algeria is a very large supplier of gas and oil, as is Libya, next door to Tunisia, and especially in the present moment, getting access to those resources as part of the global market matters. They are also important because this is more so for Europe, because they are one of the main transit routes for migrants, for irregular migrants into Europe. And this is a very sensitive topic politically in Europe, just as it is in the United States. I'd say this region is also important to the United States because I think it's the most accessible, in some ways it's the most accessible to Western countries part of the wider Middle East, North Africa region. These countries are more westernized, they are more open to the West. They have Morocco and Tunisia have thriving tourism industries. They are seeking to engage with Western countries in a way in which perhaps other countries in the region are not. And they are open to Western and American visitors, companies in a way in which other countries are not.
Jonathan, we want to thank you for coming on the show. That's Jonathan Hill. He's at George Washington University, a visiting professor.